In a move that has surprised the country, French President Emmanuel Macron says he is dissolving the National Assembly and calling a snap election in response to his party's heavy defeat in Sunday's EU polls. It's a decision he describes as a heavy one, but an act of trust. The far-right National Rally Party was the overwhelming winner, taking over 31% of the vote, with Macron's Renew alliance trailing with 14.5%, just ahead of the Socialist Party on 14%. Here's Eliza Herbert with the story.
French President Emmanuel Macron has asked the country to decide the fate of its future, calling a snap election immediately after his party's crushing defeat in the EU elections.
After having consulted Article 12 of our Constitution, I have decided to give you back the choice of our parliamentary future through the vote. I am therefore dissolving the National Assembly and will sign in a few moments a decree for legislative elections, which will be held on June the 30th for the first round and July the 7th for the second.
Projections indicated Macron's pro-European centrist party was to get just 15% of the vote at the European elections, less than half of the far-right National Rally Party with 31 to 32%. It was a poor result for Macron and his party, and one he said he could not resign himself to, suggesting he sees the rise of nationalism as a danger to Europe. Macron made the announcement shortly after Jordan Bardella, the triumphant president of the National Rally Party, called on him to take note of this new political situation. Marine Le Pen, the party's leader, then welcomed the legislative elections.
We are ready to exercise power if the French trust us in the upcoming legislative elections. We are ready to rebuild the country, ready to defend the interests of the French, ready to put an end to mass immigration, ready to make the purchasing power of the French a priority, ready to begin the reindustrialization of the country.
Now French voters have just weeks to decide. Do they want a future governed by the far right?
And in those European elections on Sunday, the centre-right European People's Party maintained its leading position in Brussels with 184 seats won so far. And second is the Socialist and Democrats grouping on 139 seats. But the biggest gains have been for the far right, with the European Conservatives and Reformists raising their share of seats to 73 and Identity and Democracy taking 58. It was a night of gains for the far right, but also celebrating was European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who hailed a successful election for the centre-right European People's Party, which topped the polls across the bloc. She said the election showed that the centre is holding. Here she is speaking in Brussels last night.
Thank you, my friends. Thank you, my friends. Today is a good day for EPP. We won the European elections, my friends. Of stability, and voters acknowledged our leadership during the last 5 years, and this is a great message to all of us. Thank you so much for all what you do.
Now, for more on Emmanuel Macron's dissolution of the National Assembly and the European elections, we can bring in Hervé Jouanjean, former Director General for Budget and Financial Programming at the European Commission. Good morning, Hervé. The news that Emmanuel Macron has dissolved the National Assembly and called snap elections has overshadowed the election results in Europe and France as well. Is this a risk for the president, do you think?
Well, good morning. I think it's quite a smart move. President Macron still has 3 years for his term as president, and had he not done that, he would be under pressure during the next 3 years because as we have already witnessed, a number of parties in France would claim that he is not legitimate. So I think he has made a very good movement. He will put the RN before its responsibilities, and he will put the French before the responsibilities. They have a certain tendency in France and in other member states at the time of the European election to vote in a kind of provocative way, most unfortunately. But now they have got to put their acts together.
And it's not unprecedented for French presidents to dissolve Parliament. But this is the first time since the presidency and the National Assembly's terms were synchronised in 2000. Can we expect to see a repeat of 1997, for instance, when Jacques Chirac surprisingly lost the elections and was forced into a power-sharing arrangement?
I think there is no doubt that the far right in France will certainly have a good result in the upcoming elections. The question is whether they will get or not the capacity to make a government. It means that they have a majority. I have not seen the polls. We will have plenty of polls in the coming days and weeks. But the fact that if they have no majority, which is probably the most likely scenario, then we will end up with an impossibility for them to govern.
And with regard to Sunday's election results, it was a big win for the National Rally in France, but it certainly wasn't unexpected. The polls all showed that they would do very well. Now, traditionally a Eurosceptic party, does the National Rally seem to be changing its tone on Europe?
I just can't answer your question. It is impossible to say. Mrs. Le Pen and Mr. Bardella have made various statements. They seem to consider, yes, we will not leave the euro, we will not do this, we will not do that. We will have to judge the facts. The facts will come very, very soon. When, let's admit, we have an election with a majority for the RN, then they will have to go to Brussels and explain what they are doing from a budgetary policy standpoint. And I think that if they follow the lines which they have defined, they may have some trouble. And at that moment, we will see exactly what is the orientation of this party.
And looking at the wider angle of the elections yesterday, there was a wave of gains for the far right across Europe. Of course, they don't actually have control of the European Parliament. That remains with the European People's Party. But how is this electoral shift going to change the way the EU is run?
Well, first, I think we've got to look as to how the various political parties will organize themselves. I'm not talking about the EPP or the SND or Renew Europe, but those which are at the right. ECR, so the Europe Conservatives and Reformists, ID and all which are non-listed and others. I mean, here we may have movements because there are, for instance, certain members of the European Parliament who are members of ECR who are not willing to be sitting with other MEPs who are totally opposed to the European Union construction or who are totally opposed to the policy vis-à-vis Russia. So I do not exclude that in the coming negotiations, we will have some movement between the EPP, the ECR, and then the question is whether Mrs. Le Pen and Mrs. Meloni will get together and find an agreement. I am not so sure that they will find an agreement, and the recent elements which we have at our disposal do not tend to prove that this will be an easy thing. I don't think that Mrs. Meloni wants to be on the same wavelength, is not on the same wavelength as Mrs. Le Pen, and I don't think they want to sit on the same benches.
Thank you very much for that, Hervé Jouanjean.
My pleasure.